All right, the button pressing has commenced, and the time-space between me sitting here in my attic and you, wherever you are listening to this right now, has been bridged. Here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this happens to be your first time here, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How is everyone doing? Maybe we should start by checking in on that. How are we feeling right now? Can we notice what our pain levels are, both physically and mentally and emotionally? Like, how are we doing? And can we notice how that pain level or our state of mind is coloring our perceptual lens today? I know that's quite a place to start. Maybe you're not in the mood to be doing that kind of inquiry, and if so, you can just set it aside. But I'm mentioning it because I was reflecting on last week's episode where we were discussing some of the practicalities of this new yoga center I opened. I shared a bunch of numbers and things have been going well, but in reflecting back on that, I was thinking about what my experience has been of having the center. And really, more than anything, it's been quite invigorating for me as a teacher on a lot of levels. And the reason for that is because one of the things that you don't get to witness so directly when you teach online is the subtle unfolding process that people sometimes go through in the context of practice. And when you have a regular class that people come to in person over time, and I have a few people who've been coming regularly now over the last 6 or 7 weeks since I opened, and already one or two of them, as I think I've mentioned, there's been like what I would consider small breakthroughs, and to watch that unfold, it's reminded me of how spectacular this and subtle it really is. The process of yoga practice feeding into someone's awareness and ultimately seeing how patterns can shift. And also, I've really just been noticing how much it takes of me to show up for that. Surely I do that when I teach online, but there is something about that in-person experience that, one, it's invigorating, like I said, but on the other hand, it is quite taxing. Not just on a physical level, definitely on a physical level, because I'm demonstrating more stuff than I have in a long time, and maybe I'll say more about that on the other side, but I think more just on like an energy output level, showing up and holding a space for people to be with themselves in a certain way, to see if we can establish ways of moving and being with our bodies that encourage patterns that we want to have rather than reinforce patterns that we don't. It's really intense, actually. I mean, I keep it light and it's fun, but on some level, it's very deep stuff, and it's easy to lose sight of that, and it's hard to find words to articulate that. Which is why that I'm very happy to welcome as my guest today, Susi Hately. Susi and I actually did meet sort of in passing many years ago. We discussed this at a International Association of Yoga Therapists conference in 2009. And she is the founder of Functional Synergy. She has been doing this subtle work of helping people move better and feel better for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been at it, longer. And It was really great to touch base with her on sort of the process that she goes through and how she came to what she's doing. And we do also touch base on like yoga therapy and yoga, and we come at it from a different angle, and it was really fantastic to have a moment to connect with her. I'm very glad to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you are enjoying this show and you have interest in connecting with me in ways outside of just listening, there's lots of opportunities for us to do that. There's ongoing weekly classes if you want to have some practice together. There's a weekly discussion group if you want to have the opportunity to be in dialogue with other people who are interested in the kind of things you hear on this show. Or maybe you're looking for some on-demand continuing education, or perhaps you would like to get into the full-length archives and become a supporter with the podcast premium subscription. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, I think we will just leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, as I like to do, but let's go ahead and get into it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Susi Hately. Hello?
Here I am. Hello.
Hi, Susi.
How are ya?
I'm okay.
Right, and now are we on video, but you're just not recording video? Is that how it works?
I mean, I am recording. I want us to consider ourselves having begun. I'm not going to use the video. The reason why I say no video is because I don't want people to feel like they have to get dressed up or for on camera.
I love it. I
want us to be more relaxed. And everybody's so used to doing Zooms now, and we've all got setups. You've got one. I've got one. So some of us are already ready. It's easy to do it, but I don't want people to feel like they have to like look good for the camera or anything.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that you haven't gone the way of let's put this on YouTube, and so many. I'm just not into that either. I'm like, the podcast is audio, find it on whatever.
Yeah, for me, I got into podcasts because I liked the way it was almost like old radio on the internet, and I engaged with it very differently. Even watching podcasts that I like that also have video, sometimes I just like prefer the audio.
Yes. I don't know. I don't get the desire of watching people talking to a mic.
I don't know. There's appeal sometimes if the production's done well, but I'm with you. I like to listen and take it into my ears, and I don't know, it has a different feel. So I'm sticking to it too. We're on the same page with that. Awesome. And also, I was trying to remember, we may have met once in passing before, many years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Cool. Were you at the Sitar conference in Los Angeles in 2009?
Probably.
I think you might have been. And maybe you were even in that. There was like some meetings that happened in the days leading up to the conference. It was called the Council of Schools Initiative.
Yes.
You were in the room. I remember. I've talked about it a couple times on the show, and it's kind of a significant moment in my mind because I had opened a center in 2007. I was doing yoga very much inspired by the Desikachar tradition, and it's all about adapting to individual needs. And it was much more of a therapeutic orientation. And I had a call with John Kepner, because he read something I had written, and he had sort of invited me to come and participate in these meetings. But at that time, in my mind, yoga therapy was not, I don't know, it was more of what I think you were, because if I'm not mistaken, you had a background already in doing occupational therapy and stuff before you shut up in that meeting in 2009. Am I right?
Yeah.
That's what I recall. To me, it was like, oh, yoga therapy is people who have these other degrees, physical therapists, occupational therapists. And then they were also bringing yoga into that. But John was saying, no, it's a lot more open than that. And I learned that in that room. There was a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, but you were already identifying as doing yoga therapy. Maybe you could say something about how you got there, leading up to that meeting. Your first work was in occupational therapy. When was that? Was that in college?
Well, no, it's not occupational therapy. So I worked at a clinic that had occupational therapists in it. So my background is in kinesiology, biomechanics.
Okay.
And then I applied that, back in the day, it was called exercise therapy. And I was working in a chronic pain center with people who were, like post motor vehicle accidents and work related accidents. And they were really like, insurance companies wanted to close their files. They were kind of at that stage. And so they came to our place. And then I along the way, I had found yoga and I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. I did my thing and I started to combine yoga because yoga had benefited me. And then preaching to the converted, it worked. Right. And we got better results when I integrated yoga, like basic stretching is what I called it back then, and breathing and just awareness. And then something kind of just got me. And I'm like, this works. And so I kind of kept at it and then did my teacher training. And then people coming to my classes all had pain. So I'm like, all right, I'll keep helping people who have pain. And then I started to notice a whole bunch of patterns amongst people who have pain. And I just kind of kept at it. And I was just doing my thing. I didn't know it was yoga therapy. I was just helping people with yoga, getting out of pain. And then so I don't even know how sitar came up. I think John Kepner may have called me. Mm-hmm. I have no idea how that part happened. I think I went to a sitar meeting because I was running a yoga therapy studio, mm-hmm. and I think I presented at a business panel. And then I think a couple of years later is when the standards started to come into play, and there was this whole conversation around yoga therapy and therapists versus yoga teachers. That all started to come along. Yeah.
Right. So, but before that, like you said, some of us, there were just certain people who were doing practicing and in ways that wasn't like at the gym. It wasn't like a total fitness orientation. And it was specifically about often addressing pain, like you said, or conditions of one sort or another, because like you, me as well, everybody who was coming in had stuff, and I wanted to teach a certain kind of class. And in order to do that, you had to kind of move into different areas it was a bit of a niche in a way because it did separate you. That's why I was at that meeting. It was like, oh, could I be a yoga therapist? And in a way that would distinguish me from all these yoga teachers. I ultimately didn't decide to do that. I've never kind of called myself a yoga therapist because I felt like in that meeting, and Gary Kraftsai was the one who kind of made the case. Yes. I remember was that this was about more of a clinical application. It was about working alongside doctors and knowing how to take soap notes and doing a lot of other stuff that I wasn't interested in. Mm-hmm. But I know that not everybody agrees with that because a lot of times it's more about a biopsychosocial spiritual model of addressing things, like the kosha model is being used in a way to kind of expand. That's where it gets kind of gray. I don't want to have that conversation. We do not have to have a conversation about how to define yoga therapy today. I've tried to do that a bunch of times. Go ahead. What would you say? Go ahead.
There's so many ways into the conversation though. And that's the problem IOIT has had is it is like when we defined it back then and now with the definition today, it's different, but it's more expansive and it's trying to meet all of those entry points in. I was on the standards committee. I was the only teacher on that committee, which started the conversation at the body. Everybody else started somewhere else. And I thought that was so fascinating. That was actually something else that was fascinating. I'm Canadian and I go into the sitar room, which was at that time mostly American. And it was like all these people were coming into the conversation in a very, very different way. And it was like, this is an American Canadian thing and then I realized that it wasn't, it was just the way I did it. But there's so many ways in, and to me, ultimately, it's helping someone, like people are not coming to me for yoga therapy. I think that's number one. They don't really care what it is that I do. And I can say that now because I'm 30 years into this. Mm-hmm. So people just know they come to Susi for a certain outcome. And so I've gotten to that place. Whereas even back in the day, when I was getting the results I was getting, I would still say that because yoga therapy was like, what's that? People are still saying that. It was more like, if you go to Susie, you will have this result. And so
she helped me. She might help you too.
Exactly. And so that was like, I never really spent time figuring out how to describe yoga therapy to people because that's not what I was selling. And so I've never really spent a lot of time thinking that, except to define it in terms of what I do as being distinct from what like Western medicine does. And the distinction is that I have the time. I have a whole hour with somebody where I can work with their body, teach them some stuff. And then out of the teaching of the stuff, they come to these awarenesses and realizations because there's a space and a container for them to be able to do that stuff. And people I've seen really great PTs do the same thing. I know doctors who do the same thing because they're very skilled at it. I just happen to have an hour. And I run a series over 3 months that enables this container to have this all happen. And so in the process of it, people start to see these relationships between how their body moves and how they think and their beliefs. And it's not that I purposely guide them to, now, how do you think? And now what's going on with your soul and your spirit? Like, that's not the conversation. It all kind of happens quite organically because of the way that I'm teaching them to recognize their body. They start to see these other patterns of recognition in their sphere called their human being and body and mind and all of that. And so it unfolds in a way for people that is just so easy. I'll put it as easy because it's easy. Sometimes it's difficult, but there's an easiness to it that funnily enough, really honors a lot of the pain science that's been coming out more and more recently. And the whole idea of safety and the whole idea of nervous system downregulation and vagal tone and all that stuff, like all that recent science that's being kind of outlined now and expressed, like that's what we were doing. That's what I was doing way long ago. Like that's what yoga's been doing if it's done well, way long ago. So that to me is there's the inherent dance there. And to me, I'm happy to say that we overcomplicate a lot of things. And this process can be really simple. And I want to clarify that it's not easy, but it's easy. Mm-hmm. And human beings can be complex, but the process doesn't have to be complicated, And so I think that's a thing that attracts people to me because I'm not making it like, do they go through some significant changes in their life? Yeah, because everyone who comes to see me, they've tried a bunch of stuff. It hasn't worked. It has worked. And they're frustrated. They want better. They want more. They want whatever. And so there's usually layers and layers and layers. But that just because there's layers doesn't mean it's like humans are complex. It doesn't mean it's complex. You know what I mean? So and I think I'm really fortunate because I don't have like, I don't say that. I say this in the most loving way to myself possible. Like I'm a yoga teacher. Like,
well, it's so funny that you say that. I mean, one, I think it's interesting to hear you say that the yoga therapy, like name category or whatever to call it. I don't know what we call it, that terminology, that for you is a way to actually distinguish from a Western medicine approach more than to try to distinguish yourself from like fitness instructors. Yeah. Which I think is very interesting because it does seem to me to be what you just described is yoga and what makes it yoga therapy. I just had Nritya, who's the director of the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram on, and she basically kind of said the same thing that you just said, that we're maybe overcomplicating the conversation about when it ends being yoga and when it ends being yoga therapy or when it becomes yoga therapy. Yeah. And that it is a kind of more simple relational process that we're talking about.
But we can say that, I think, because we've been at it for the length of time we have. Mm. That's one thing. But the other thing is when I say that I'm just a yoga teacher, I had a very clear understanding very, very early in my career that I was just a yoga teacher. Yes, I had kinesiology, anatomy, exercise physiology, biomechanics, and all of that yummy, lovely stuff. And the way I was applying it was through yoga. I'm not an acupuncturist. I don't have needles. I don't have a scalpel. I don't have hands-on chiropractic techniques. I can't go in and fix stuff. Like I don't have those modalities. I can't test what muscle is firing and what's not. I don't have that skill. So all I have, and I say that really like, thank God, all I have is my eyes and my heart and my state of presence. And I'm really good at seeing stuff. And I've grown that skill. And so I apply that. And I'm really good at communicating and asking a ton of questions. So those are the skills that I use, which really enable me to get the results that I do, I think. Yeah.
I appreciate hearing you say all those things, because I noticed in your bio that you wrote a book on anatomy and asana in 2004.
Yeah.
And I remember a time when there was a lot of conversation. In fact, I wrote an article for the IYT that was entitled, "Does Studying Anatomy Make Yoga Safer?" And I interviewed Judith Hansen-Lassiter and Leslie Kaminoff and like 3 or 4 people and asked them that question. And also Neil Pearson, the pain science guy, he was in that article too. Mm-hmm. And 3 out of the 4 said no. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that's my kind of question to you, is that I think that understanding something about like biomechanics is definitely useful, mm-hmm. but it in and of itself doesn't make the magic happen or whatever that you're describing. So yeah. What do you think the role of understanding biomechanics, or like in a yoga education for yoga teachers, how is that important or useful, and how is it not?
Okay. So here's how I'll answer that question. When I wrote the book, I can't believe I'm going to admit this here. Okay. So when I wrote the book, there was a phase in which where yoga was at. There was only one other book written, and that was, I'm forgetting the guy's name. It was the very, very first yoga anatomy book.
It was a pretty thick one, white book. I know what you're talking. I can't think of his name either.
I know. And
The Anatomy of Hatha Yoga or something like
that. That's it. I'm really sorry for the fellow who wrote it.
Yes, who the author? We're not giving you proper credit. Yeah, we both know which book we're talking about.
We're going to put it in the show notes, right?
Yes, I will.
But and I remember really quite enjoying reading it. And most people would fall asleep reading it because it was quite dense and quite heavy. And I'm like, I want to write something that's and I was already in the process of writing. And what came about is I was doing teacher trainings for another teacher. I was doing anatomy for teacher trainings. And I was like going from one anatomy book to another anatomy. And someone's like, you got to write your own book. And I'm like, oh God, no, I'm not going to do that. I got to see in English, And then something kind of bit me, and I kept going. But there was a part of me that got like, when I would see the way some yoga was being taught, I was like, oh Jesus, we're like, there's a lot of things people don't understand enough about movement, and they're doing these things based off of these cues, and they don't understand what these cues are doing. And so, but the other side of it is that, and I also had a lot of rock star yoga teachers back in the day emailing me and saying, why am I in pain? I'm like, well, it's because you're doing yoga. And they're like, but I do yoga. I'm like, it's because it's how you're doing it. Mm. And I realized that a lot of the problems we were facing in the movement was, people didn't understand the movement, and they were doing a lot of compensation and just finding ways, the path of least resistance to doing things. And so I just outlined, why problems happen in back bends, why problems happen in twists, and why problems happen in the various groups of poses. And so that's sort of what led to the book, because I didn't want yoga to hurt too many people, that people wouldn't come to yoga, because I think yoga is like the greatest thing ever. And that book did really, really well, when I launched it. And that kind of opened up the gates to me train more teachers, which leads me to now, because back then yoga teachers didn't know what a psoas was. They didn't know what a hamstring was. They kind of knew what like some things were. Now there's a lot more knowledge about anatomy. Like there's a lot more knowledge about what muscles are what. People know the muscles. I think the gap that exists right now is what movement is, and how there's sort of there's a gap. And so I find that the people who come and train with me, most of them are not health professionals. We've got a cohort, a sub cohort that's PTs, OTs, and such, but most of them are yoga teachers. Who haven't had a lot of anatomy training, are really nervous about the anatomy training, but they're coming to me because of this mechanical aspect that I have. And we focus more so, rather than on naming and memorizing muscles, we focus more so on when you're looking at somebody and moving, like what's actually meant to be moving in this movement? Like, is the arm meant to be moving? Is the jaw meant to be tensing? Is the leg bone meant to be like, what's meant to be happening? And what's not meant to be happening? And what are you actually seeing? Because the reality is that if you're a yoga teacher, you're either on a Zoom with a whole bunch of small screens, or you're in a room with a whole bunch of people. You can't like see the muscle that's doing whatever it's doing. You can see body parts moving relative to body parts. So is the body part relative to body parts? This relationship, is that what's happening that needs to be happening or not? Yes or no? And it's a very binary answer. And so what people really gain is this capacity to see the movement. And it's more so that they can name what they've already been seeing, but they doubted that they could see it, because they may say to someone, hey, you know what? Your ribs are flaring. And the person's like, no, they're not. I can't feel that. And then the yoga teacher's like, well, maybe I don't see it. So, and then they doubt themselves. And so when they start to actually see, okay, this is what's moving, this is what's not moving, this is what's meant to be moving, not like this is the right way to move, but you're seeing like the person's movement patterns. Now they're like, aha, now I see what's working and what's not working. And a reality that I found over time is when people have pain, persistent physical pain, when I can help them move better, they feel better, hands down, like 99.999% of the time. Mm-hmm. And that's a fundamental starting point for me when I'm working with people. The other is if someone has a physiological condition, if they're recovering from surgery, if they're going through chemotherapy, if they have Crohn's disease, when I help them move better, they feel better. So I can utilize these movement concepts to help them feel into their body, because to get there, you've got to grow your interoceptive and proprioceptive awareness. And when you do that, now you've grown your awareness, and all of a sudden that trickles over, as we talked about earlier, into the other koshic layers. But that's the piece I think that's really vital, is you can know hamstrings and psoas and glutes and rotator cuff and all that stuff and sound really smart. And if you don't know how to actually apply it in a biomechanical way, I think you're going to lose a lot of opportunity and potential for what difference you can make and how you can serve the client and the students that you're seeing. That's all. I think that's fundamental there.
I think you're certainly onto something. I don't know if it's just biomechanical. I think that's why a lot of yoga teachers have gotten into like somatic movement modalities, yes. Because we're trying to like feel into bodies and know how to facilitate people feeling into their bodies more than just having an idea of alignment based on some kind of mechanical setup that we think is supposed to be optimal. And to the other point that you made about seeing what's happening in the body, I remember when that sort of first kind of something like that clicked with me, where all these yoga teachers were teaching everybody to kind of maintain axial extension in their spines, like in everything, like in all of your forward bends and everything. And I remember at some point realizing that if I'm always holding my spine like this, every time I fold forward, the only thing that's moving is my hips. That there was the targeting of the movement was to certain areas where I was having pain. And I was like, oh, well, isn't that interesting? So at some point it did mean, and that's why there's that yoga therapy direction of kind of getting away from some of these classical alignments that we're taught, that we were supposed to all make ourselves look like light on yoga or something. At some point we did have to kind of let go, and maybe people like you writing the book that you wrote and stuff kind of was that process of people kind of saying, oh yeah, maybe this isn't all what it's, touted to be. Maybe we should be questioning it some. Right.
And movement though, and movement function is very distinct from alignment, because yes. A lot of it can really mess people up. So there's like the classic way of doing a pose, which is really cool. It's great to see that. Just like when you look at running or riding or skiing or whatever activity out there, there's like a classic way that it's taught. If you get a coach or a teacher or whatever, and then it's like, okay, but hold on a second. Does that even make sense for this individual? And how are they actually moving? And what a lot of people who learn from me recognize is they say, wow, there's a lot of people who learn a lot of cueing in yoga that actually teaches more compensation patterns in order to make this thing look a certain way. And it looks like you're getting alignment, but you're actually creating a lot more tension. So even a lot of posture work out there, like just general posture, not like yoga posture, but like posture, is a lot of like, let's put your head back and let's put your ribs in and let's do this.
Take your shoulders back and yeah.
And it's all adding more tension into the mix. It's not really recognizing, but hold on a second. If posture is an embodiment of our structure, then that's the safest place a person feels in their structure. So why am I trying to change that very thing where they feel the safest? Now I understand that there could be another way to be, but my aim isn't to go after the posture. But what happens is as I help them move better, as it relates to their symptoms and as it relates to the condition or whatever, guess what happens? Their posture improves, but not because I made it happen. We're not Lego pieces where we put blocks in certain places. It's because how their body parts are relating to each other has shifted, right? And then they are relating to themselves has shifted too.
I so appreciate that because I came to the idea of it being about movement patterns, just trying to address pain in my own system, that, targeting certain muscle groups where the pain was often was making things way worse than helping. Yes. And that's actually something I wanted to speak with you about today because I noticed this when I was on the Functional Synergy website and I was like, amen, amen. It says the problem isn't always where the pain is. Yes. And I came to realize that. And it's one of the biggest obstacles, like when someone's coming to practice with me and they're coming with pain, the idea that you're going to stretch or strengthen the point of where the pain is and convincing people that there's a way to address that pain that's not going direct to where the pain is. Can you speak to why that is? Can you speak to why sometimes the way to address someone's pain is to not go to right where the pain is, but to try to explore everything else around it?
Yeah, for sure. And then I'll give some ideas that people can actually play with. So
okay.
We have been in a culture where it's like, if there's pain, that is a problem. Like if there's pain, there is a problem. And so there's got to be something wrong if there's pain, right? Makes sense, right? It makes a lot of sense. And then what we've also seen from a research perspective is that there are a whole lot of people out there who have lots like wrong structurally in their body. And we've seen these in MRIs and they don't have pain. And then there are people who like through MRIs don't have any structural problems and they have a ton of pain. So what I like to say is it's clear that pain and structural problems or tissue damage are not correlated. Like it's not correlated. It doesn't mean the pain's not real. And I really emphasize that. It doesn't mean the pain's not real because what sometimes will happen for people is they'll get very upset. They'll say, but the scan shows nothing. And I'm like, hallelujah. Mm-hmm. Isn't that awesome that there's nothing showing on the scan? And they're like, yes, but then how do I solve the problem? I'm like, that's what I'm great at because there's so much more in terms of these relationships between parts and how tissue is functioning and responding. That's where we can make a big difference. But isn't it awesome that there isn't a structural thing? Like awesome. So now let me restate that in another way. Person comes back and they're like, oh my gosh, there's stenosis. Like, isn't that like, my life is over. And I'm like, you know what? Isn't it awesome that you now know that there's a structural issue? Isn't that amazing that you now know that? And they're like, but there's a problem. I'm like, yes, you know what it is. Isn't that awesome? You know, because now we know that there's this thing and now we can work with your body and help your body find the stability and greater function so that doesn't have to be a limitation. Right? So it's like, whether you see it or whether you don't, it's like, isn't that awesome? So now I kind of shift it for them now. And so then that I find that will help people recognize that pain and tissue damage aren't correlated. So now I start to open this door of like, okay, now we start moving better and you start to explore how you're moving and the way your joints function and just how you're gripping, holding, breathing, all the things. Then they feel their symptoms go down. And as their symptoms go down, they're like, hey, I feel better. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Let's not step over that. And they say, but I'm like, you're feeling better. I said, do you know what that means? And they're like, no, tell me. I said, it means you can feel better. And they look at me kind of like, I'm like, your body has told you and shown us it can feel better. So it means you can feel better. The fact that your pain has gone down, the fact that your pain is gone means you can have that long term because your body has just demonstrated it. And guess what? You have stenosis. Isn't that pretty cool? And that's when their brain starts to be like, oh, no. right, on some level. And now it's opened up the game of possibility for them. They're like, okay, now I get this. Okay, sure. There's this thing going on my body. Yep, I get it. And I have done something, like me, not me, Susie, but them, the client. I have done something, and I have a greater locus of control. So it's like, I don't do any of this euphemistically, by the way. And how I just spoke about it, I get as excited for my clients as they do, when this all happens, because when someone has this reduction, I really do have to like state it clearly, because so often they'll go someplace, and there's a lot of brilliant therapists out there of all different stripes. And the therapist will do something with them and their tissue, and they'll feel good. And then out the door they go, maybe with a sheet of exercises, maybe not. But the person did something to them.
Right.
And so I want to be really, really clear to them. You did this. Like, this was you. Like, sure, I guided you, but like, you did this to you. And I really state that, because I'm like, you can do this again to you. And that's when they're like, whoa, yeah. And then you can see everything in their being and their posture start to shift, and the relationships between them and them start to change. So I think there's this piece, right, of like, we are kind of summarize. It's like we're so focused in our culture around, if there's pain, that's actually the problem, which is not the case. And then when we can take someone through this process, and when they have had that reduction, to say, hey, guess what? This means you can have it. Now there's a bit of work to do. Sure. I'll help you with that. But here's the evidence. Like, what more do you need? Yeah.
I know,
it's a really cool step.
It is a cool step, and it is the step that I was hoping to point to, but that's the yoga step in my mind. Yes. Because, and I talked about this on the show last year, I finally went and got an MRI on my hip. And it did show labral tears. They injected the ink, and they found the labral tears there, which is what I hypothesized it likely was.
Yep.
And it did change things for me. I have to admit, to your point about, like, I, for a lot of years, had the chronic pain in my hip and never got the scan. And, I felt a certain way about it. And I think the reason why I eventually did go get the scan is because I just didn't trust. I didn't trust my own assessment of it or my own ability to address it. So I wanted an intervention. I wanted to see if Western medicine could offer me an intervention. And it didn't, but it did offer me a bunch of information, because it was really interesting. I was an unusual case. Like, my orthopedic guy who was helping me, who was great, basically was like, normally if I see labral tears, I see a very unhealthy hip joint as well. But your hip joint's great. You've got great mobility. You can move great. And the actual things that they would do for those labral tears probably would cause a lot more potential issues than I was dealing with right now. And he was like, at some point, if you want a steroid shot, if it's bad, I could give you a steroid shot. But really, it was like, okay, so now I know what I thought was true is true. And it is what you say. One, you do have to believe it's possible. You have to believe it's possible that you're not going to be totally have this pain impeding your life all these times. But then it is a matter, and I found this to be true, it is slightly about movement patterns, but it's not just the movement patterns. I call them pain patterns, because there's like a psycho-spiritual component to those movement patterns. As you were saying earlier,
sure. Yep.
Your posture, when you go under anesthesia, it kind of falls away and they can move your body all around, right? But when you're awake and you're conscious, you're being held in a certain way and you're moving in a certain way through life like that.
Yes. So one of the things that I've learned with my folks who have eradicated pain is we can't just change our thought pattern. Our thought pattern, in my belief, that's my belief.
You can't think your way out of it. I tried. It doesn't work.
And there might be people in the thought world that may argue with me, which is totally fine. I'd be open for that. And because what I think happens is people want to think better about their pain. They want to believe better about their pain, but they still have an underlying current. I sometimes call it like chocolate covered caca, right? Like there's the caca and we try to think positively about it, but the caca still exists, right? It's still there. And so to get to the caca, so to speak, what I have found is it's when someone feels a change as a result, right? So they do a bunch of things and they notice the result. And then when they notice the result, often what can happen is, yeah, but it's just going to come back. And when they give me that answer, I say, you're right, it will. And they look at me like, you're not supposed to say that. I'm like, it's going to come back because you have all these grooved movement patterns. You've had all these grooved ways of being that have contributed to why you have and feel and move the way you do and hold yourself, because how you hold yourself and is all like, there's more to movement. Exactly. There's more to movement than that. But what's going to happen is that right now you notice that there's a reduction of pain. So when you leave here and before you come back, when you come back, I'm going to ask you, for how long did this stay away? And then see if you can notice when the staying away bit fades, because I'm going to ask you. And so when they come back, and it's usually a week later, they come back and I'll say, all right, so tell me what happened. They're like, well, it kind of was gone for 2 hours or it was gone for 4 or a day or 2 or whatever. And I'll say, okay, let's see if we can extend that now. And then I've usually given them a program to do and things to notice and other things of that sort. And then we go through the program, we go through what's happening. And typically they've gained some awareness and all this. And then they usually get another step and they get a little bit more like, ooh, my hip and my shoulder. I didn't know that there was my breath. I didn't know that there was this relationship here. And now we've kind of got these, this is kind of cool. And now we're in a place of curiosity. And we know that with curiosity, the mindfulness research is like, if you're trying to do something the right way, you tend to be more in a sympathetic drive. When you're in a place of exploratory and curiosity, you tend to be in a more of a parasympathetic drive. So when you're kind of in I got to do this right, there can be this
or just like you're in too much pain. Sometimes it's hard to be curious when you're in a lot of pain.
Yeah. And so then what happens is these ideas and these realizations and these connections start to come, they bubble into the surface and this awareness starts to grow. Now they got a better result. And that better result lasts for longer. So then they come back and they're like, well, that lasted for a week or that lasted for 10 days. Or here's what else I noticed. Or guess what? I'm seeing these people, their shoulders are so tight. Like the awareness starts to grow. And so what I call those moments are novel experiences. And and that's when we have a novel experience, the door opens and it's like, ooh, I didn't know this was possible. That's when the thought changes, because now the caca isn't just the only reality. Now there's another thing that's like, ooh, possibility. That becomes a new reality. Not the reality, but it's like, hey, I have a caca thought and I also have this other reality thought. These two both can exist. Yeah. And then we just kind of keep working it. As they hone these relational patterns, then they start to see more than just movement patterns. They see the breathing patterns. They see the beingness in it all. And that's when things really start to shift, like how they're doing their work or how they're doing their yoga or how they're doing their parenting or how they're doing and they just start to see all these factors that contribute to this. And that's where the real change starts to happen. Right. And that's the evolution, bit by bit, piece by piece.
Yeah, that is the kind of shift of perspective I was mentioning that there has to happen when someone's dealing with their own pain and stuff. And it is interesting to me the way that you said earlier, like when someone moves better.
Yeah.
So that maybe what do you mean by that? Like, I think I know what you mean, that if I can have a breathing and moving practice with someone where they're like setting boundaries and working within the boundaries that they're set, like they're not taking their arm so far that it hurts. And sometimes that's the challenge, because like we said earlier, they think they're supposed to go into the area. But if I say, oh, let's find a range where we're not going into any places of pain and just let it be easy, as you were saying, like moving in a more, it's not lazy. We're doing it. Yep. Like sthira-sukha, right? It's strong, but it's easeful.
Yep.
And setting a precedence of that. For someone, maybe they're not moving that way at all in their lives, but for this like 20 to 40 minutes or whatever they were, Is that what you mean when you say when they move better? Like, what do you mean when you say move better? How would you define?
I'll highlight that with two related stories. The first is how I sort of happened upon the way that I do what I do is one of my first, actually my very first yoga job was at a local studio. We had one or two studios in my city at the time.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.